Authority Board meeting agenda. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Whoops, we're supposed to do a roll call, so I'll do that now. Commissioner Buck.
Here.
Commissioner Rooney.
Here.
Commissioner Hogan.
Sure. Yes.
Commissioner Gutsa.
Here.
And note that Commissioners Swenson and Evans are not present, and Commissioner Talcott is here. Okay, first item we have is the consent agenda. It's made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Those items include the approval of the board meeting minutes from September 29th, 2015, payroll checks totaling $77,672.01, maintenance and operations checks 21771 to 21830 totaling $809,679.24. Approval of the passenger facility charge. I'm glad we're approving that no charge. And financial reports for September. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
I move to accept the consent agenda as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion at this point? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, consent agenda passes. Directors report. Anything to report? Anything going on?
Yeah, I tell you, if you're not excited about today's meeting, you don't like airports. There's all kinds of good stuff going on. Just to give you a quick project update, we're very near to completing the construction program for this summer, the entry-exit road program, Value Park construction. As you came in today, you probably noticed everything's more or less milled and overlaid now. Most of the roads are finished. We've got the temporary markings down, with the oil, fresh oil on that road. We don't expect those to hold up very well, so they'll come back and restripe that in the spring, which is typically how these things are done. So, but we do have temporary markings down. The toll plaza should be opening anytime in the next couple of days, maybe the next 2 or 3 days. They'll move into the new toll plaza, and then they'll be demoing the old toll plaza out here in the lot. So. They've got about another week to complete that work. We are trying to get the utility guys out here and the city approvals to get the new toll booth occupancy permit. Like any new building, you're somewhat beholden in the end to the jurisdiction to get that building online. But so far we think everything's pretty much in line. We ran into a little bit of hiccup a couple weeks ago because Montana didn't recognize the universal certificate the builder had for their prefab sheds. That was one of the few states, for whatever reason, they had to acquire an additional stamp from the state to use their prefab shed. So, but we've gotten through all that now, and the project's really come together quite nicely. The new exit road is open and in operation. The Value Park, other than the street lighting, is ready to go. We're hoping to get that open by Thanksgiving so that we can have that product online. The metered lot, which is right down here behind me, is all restriped and also ready to go. We're in need of a revenue machine, which is on the agenda today. Otherwise, it'll be ready to go. And we think in the next 2 weeks, pretty much everything should be wrapped up, including the expansion of the gate down here for the truck deliveries, and also the FAA bypass. As you go up, if you go past the terminal today, you'll see the FAA bypass is actually under construction there with the little road that'll get them over to their FAA tower. The master plan, more progress has been made in the last month. We did send a number of comments off to the consultant based on the alternatives they presented at the meeting last month. They're working to incorporate those right now. They'll be taking those alternatives to the matrix that they discussed at the last meeting to identify the preferred alternatives, and then they'll give us an idea of what they think the preferred alternatives are. So we have an opportunity to comment on those also before they begin to write up those chapters. They should be generating some exhibits back to us probably by the time we have the next board meeting. Hopefully we'll have them so we can bring those back and take one last look at the preferred alternatives. Alaska had their first full month of their new schedule, and we think they did quite well. They employed about 700 additional passengers, which was a 30% gain. They're right in there now with United in terms of the number of total monthly passengers, which is a big improvement. Their average load factor was only 72%, which we need to see that improve some. About another 150 passengers a month would do it. So we're on the thin margin of really being able to say that flight is very successful. September is about the fourth worst month of the year, right behind kind of January, February, and sometimes November can be kind of flat. But so September, to do that well in September, we thought was pretty good. As we get through October, we'll kind of see what a kind of an average month looks like for them. But the feedback I got from the local station thus far is the flights right as school was starting were not good. I think they told me they had one flight where they put like 6 people on it, and you never like hearing that. But then since then, the flights have filled in quite nicely. So I kind of think that might be our marketing plan, saturating a little bit into some of those cheaper fares. Alaska has tremendous fares right now in Hawaii, the West Coast. Really their strength in their network right now. So hopefully, as we get through October, we'll see improved numbers there. But a pretty good month for the launch, I thought. The other thing I'd note I was looking yesterday at Frontier's schedules. There's been some information bouncing around that they may not come back to Montana. I noted that they don't have any flights right now available in the state in January. So indeed, they might be leaving the state as soon as the end of the year when I looked on their website. So we'll monitor that to see what they do there. I was also going to mention I had a great call with Jeff Gear. You may remember he came last month. He's also the fellow that helped put together the Bravo 369 Air Show this summer. He's the lead of the Bravo 369 group that has the Texan. He's, as we talked about last month, considering moving that project up here to Great Falls. We had a great call. He's looking into incorporating in Montana right now because they're incorporated in Washington for their nonprofit. He would have to reincorporate in Montana. And he's also asked, and any help anyone has on this would be terrific, but he's looking for a hangar spot. He'd like to hangar the plane up here this winter as they look to move it over here. So he asked if we knew anybody that had some space. I don't know if anybody has any ideas, but we'll be shopping that around to see if there's a spot somewhere where he could keep that. His goal is to try and put together some drawings for us in the next couple of weeks so we can put them into the master plan, kind of show what a museum campus would look like over in our GA area. And that way, if the project does come to fruition, we've already got it in the master plan. We don't have to go through the FAA. The programmatic environmental will be done. We can just kind of move that project right into getting it done. So that would probably come about as part of that development we do down there next year when Red Horse builds the taxi lane. We'll probably come back to the board sometime in the spring and ask to build the lift station and really complete the utilities down in that GA area so we can start moving projects forward. But I thought that was a really terrific development. I think he's really thinking towards moving that project out here. So pretty exciting stuff. Then the other thing I was going to report, we did have some conversations, was it 2 weeks ago we were in Helena? Yeah, 2 weeks ago down in Helena about the engineering selection. Every year the Helena conference is kind of the first time we see some of the new rules and rewrites that the FAA is coming up with. And I was thinking today it's kind of like that Forrest Gump quote. It's like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. So this year, to our surprise, we got new rules on engineering selections. One of which is they're very concerned that the master plan be disseminated out to everybody with plenty of time to see it and absorb it before engineering selections are done. Now, in reality, that doesn't work out particularly well because you're designing and constructing on a very tight schedule. In our case, it does happen to work out because we don't have any projects scheduled for the 2016 design season, which is the 2017 construction season. All of our funding for the next 2 years is being sucked into runway 1634, which opens up a window in 17 where we don't have a federal project. So for us, we can delay the selection, and that's what they're asking us to do, is to delay the engineering selection until several months after the master plan is complete, to give all the potential engineers an opportunity to review that and be familiar with it. That also provides some benefit because we don't have a design project in 16. The FAA likes us to limit these contracts to 5 years, so that gives them a little extra time on the 5 years. Since we won't have a project that first year, they'll get a little bit of extra time in the following year to have a 5-year contract. So with that noted, we'll wait a few months to start that selection process until we get the master plan underway. Hopefully that'll all be, we can get a selection out there in May or June, so there's plenty of time to begin thinking about the following year's design project. But that was interesting feedback that I wasn't prepared to get at that meeting. I'm sure all the other airports probably have similar problems to us in terms of accommodating that, but that's what the FAA has asked us to do. And that's all I have on the director's report this month.
Okay, then let's take a look at this Northwestern Energy.
Yeah, as we've noted for the last few months, dating back to I think the 70s, the airport had a number of unmetered poles up here at the airport. A project in 2003 refed the electrical to a lot of our streetlights in the kind of the terminal loop area, and it looks like at that time we refed the electric to these poles that were unmetered. That circuit happened to connect to the terminal circuit, and so we were actually billed twice for the same poles, even though, one of them was metered and one of them was unmetered. So for a number of years, since about 2003, we were paying for these unmetered poles that were in fact now on meters. So as we went through a energy audit last year, we're auditing a number of the meters that we have accounts linked to. Rod and his crew figured out that we had these additional billings. We verified the timeline. Unfortunately, in the plans, there's not a smoking gun. It doesn't say the feed came from X and it says refeed from Y, and so you have to kind of make the leap that X was the unmetered pole. But as we looked at the billings, we also saw kind of a shelf in the building billings where these would have happened in 2003. There's an increase in the electrical bill that never comes back down or changes with the rate. So you would expect some fluctuation with rate changes. This little shelf kind of goes in there, implying that there's an addition to the bill in that time frame, thus the unmetered poles. We think the billings in that period were about $130,000 under the PSC rules. Were due our back billing plus interest. Where we've asked Northwest Energy if instead of just having a cash payout, if we could undertake a program to convert all of our landside lights to LED. And that would also include these terminal mast lights behind us. There's two reasons. Electric is our largest single operating expense. We think about 25% of that is associated with the landside portion of the airport. So if we could begin to make a dent in the electrical bill, that would help our operating costs. In addition, we spend quite a bit of time changing these bulbs. You can see there's a number of very high masts out there. It's not practical for us to own a piece of equipment to maintain those. So we rent equipment to reach those high masts. The lower mast ones we do have equipment to reach, but it's still a lot of man hours for 2 guys to go out and change light bulbs. The filament bulbs that we have throughout the outside here at the airport in our wind loads tend to deteriorate quickly. We're lucky to get 2 years out of a bulb. The LEDs without a filament we believe will hold up much better in the rigors of our wind and temperatures. And so we think overall this would be a really great project. And what we'd like the board to consider is giving staff the latitude to negotiate a settlement with Northwest and then execute a project with Northwest. Settlement in the amount of somewhere in the neighborhood of $160,000, $180,000 in that vicinity. And then the project would be around a $160,000 project to complete the LED conversion.
Have they agreed in principle to the $160,000 number?
They agree that they owe us. We haven't settled yet on the exact amount, and the side of the house that does the LED conversions is separate from the other side of the house, and so they're working through contractually how that would have to be done. I think it's as simple as just agreeing to what the dollar amount is and then contracting separately, but they're trying to work through that yet. I was hoping to get an update from them today, but the fellow we've been working with was out of town last week, so.
The LED contractor would be Northwestern?
They order the lights, I think is how it works, isn't it?
Yeah, they use that incentive program.
Yeah, they order the lights, and then we would use
Hire out.
Cascade Electric's given us a bid already, and they would simply fund, both the lights and the contractor.
You said right now, they agree they owe, but the magnitude has not been raised?
I think they agreed to the $130,000. The question becomes how much interest do we want to collect from them? And PSC in the past has, I think there are some guidelines on that, but again, our thinking is it's a win-win for both of us if we can get this LED done, and it will help us with our future electrical bills.
Any other questions?
I probably misunderstood. The $160,000 was the total cost of the conversion or the cost of
Labor,
addition?
labor and lights.
Okay, so most of that would be covered by what, Northwest?
All of it.
All of it.
We're asking that they would cover the complete conversion.
Okay.
If it doesn't, though, it comes out of airport budget.
Well, we'd probably scale the project back. We'd start cutting a few lights out to get it, we don't want any outlay for this project. We've been looking for a way to get it funded, but it's going to take multiple years to get everything done, so we want to kind of do it in phases as we can identify the funding.
John, do you have a ballpark yet of what it would cost to convert the entire airport to LED?
The airfield's kind of a hot item right now. There is a tremendous energy savings possibility, but the FAA most recently has said they don't want us to do airfields because the lights aren't hot enough to melt the snow off of them in cold climates. And so where they've deployed them, I think Denver was one of the first ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a few around.
Yeah, they've had problems because the snow covers the lights, and then you got to go out and broom off lights, which, that's a tremendous amount of man hours. So as of yet, the
Well, we
FAA
heat the
guidance.
bulbs.
Yeah, they also have heaters in them, but then when you use the heaters, that takes away
Energy
your
efficiency goes right out the
efficiency
window.
from the LED.
So, I think we're kind of focused right now on the land side, and then the terminal we have no cost for. Part of the problem in the terminal is you're looking at the mood lighting, the color of the lighting, the saturation. We have architectural lighting in this terminal that's hard to replicate because it's got those multiple spotlights. A lot of thought was obviously put into the lighting when they did it. We've tried a few experiments trying to recreate the lighting in there, and it's been pretty bad. Because the LEDs it's a hotter light. It's hard to get a softer light, and so when you walk out of the checkpoint, if you look, you're looking right at the lights on the first floor. They're right at eye level, and the first few LEDs we put in there were just retina burning. When you walked out of there, you looked at them, you're like, whoa, that's horrible. So the terminal is going to take probably some architectural help to get the right product. FedEx, which is the other one we'd like to get converted, that's 70,000, wasn't it? Wasn't
Yeah,
quite.
70,
Was
I
it?
think, to convert just the apron lighting.
Yeah, 70,000, and we're hoping that FedEx would participate in that. Those are the worst of the lights because those high masts really sway. Those filaments get knocked out really quickly, and sometimes we don't even get a year out of a bulb, and they're very high. So that we try to do them all in one shot every year and go
Every
and
couple
replace the
years.
bulbs.
There's additional mast lighting on this side, on your side, right?
That's what I'm talking about. The terminal masts are actually in this project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're in the 160. We would get all the terminal and all the land side done. And then, we're left with the terminal inside itself, and then eventually the FedEx mast lights. But I did talk to FedEx about it when I was down in Memphis, and they thought there might be a program that we could participate in with them to replace those lights. So I've got to follow up on that and see if there is some funding out there.
A number of these street lights will be converted to LED through this project too, so.
Yeah, all of our future projects, we're just going to go LED right out of the box. But we will have a mix out there until we do something.
Well, any other questions?
So you think that the amount that they owe us plus interest, it might be a wash?
Yeah, that's what we've proposed to them is, we think, it's about a 4% interest rate at $160,000. We think that's a fair agreement for both parties, that we would agree to that, and they would fund the entire project, and, we would agree to that settlement.
Have you discussed it with the PSC?
We haven't brought the PSC into it yet.
I'm
We're
not
hoping-
suggesting you do. I have in the past with Northwestern, because sometimes they can be very rigid, they're corporately driven.
Yeah.
But with the PSC's help, it was enough to at least push it into a positive area for us.
I think we'll get there. I mean, I'm pretty confident they're interested in it. And we kind of pointed out this could be a real showcase for the community in terms of that program they have to convert, banks and other things to LED. I mean, to have several different types of light and lighting throughout, I think there's some benefit to it.
I think what Stan's saying, if they don't come to the 160 number right away, you might need some help, or a reasonable number that, to put them over the top.
They didn't even have to have the PSC advocate for us. It was just enough for them to know we were speaking.
Yeah.
It helped.
Any other questions? Chair will entertain a motion concerning the staff recommendation.
I move to grant authority to the executive to proceed these negotiations with Northwestern Energy.
I second.
That's the motion you're looking for?
Yes.
All those, if there's any other questions, comments? All those in favor of the motion as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And I would say leave the lights here in the terminal so that maybe they'll warm this joint up. You can't afford to take any more heat out of here. Get out of here, it'll freeze us out of here.
Spoken like a skinny.
I think it's the lights that are keeping us warm right now. And you got them pointed up. All right. How about the SCSI grant? You wanna-
Yeah, we
you wanna do
did
anything with
receive.
that?
Yeah, we did receive our first SCSD offer for a route development project, $385,000 for Chicago route. We continue to talk to some airlines. It looks like there might be some interest in a 2016 start for that route. So later in the agenda on the work session, we got some discussion in there on incentives. But we're pretty pleased about this. We think it's a positive development for us. And this is another project that is coming from the partnership we formed with the Chamber and local investors who funded that initial Frontier pool. We're still using that pool to further our route development process here in town. And hopefully, if this route's very successful, we'll have that fund remaining for more projects in the future.
How much of that community pool has gone away, or has it?
It's fully intact. We've never put a route out there that wasn't profitable.
But I understand that we haven't spent any of it.
Nope.
But has everybody recommitted?
Everybody has. Yeah, the TBID asked to hold their own money, was the one thing that they asked. So they pulled their money out,
Oh, gotcha.
and they've held it. But then, when we went to them and asked them about this project, they came right back in with the amount that they had originally pledged. So yeah, it's, the money is still intact.
Okay. Nobody is against accepting the SCSD grant, or has any comments or questions, and the chair will entertain a motion to give the airport director the authority to accept the SCSD grant.
I move that we accept the money.
And give the airport director the ability to do that for us. Good idea. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. We're flying by. How about a parking pay station?
Yeah, we've got this lot over here. You can kind of see it in the corner. It's a little bit of a pullout. I'm not sure what the original intent of that was when it was constructed, back when the roadways were put in place. It's been used for primarily for law enforcement parking the last few years when they go out of town. And then some other federal agency cars started showing up, and we started taking note of the amount of parking that was, being assumed to be free. And so as we got into this project this year, we said, we ought to really look for something, other thing we could do with that lot. As we began to study the possibilities and looking at the short-term lot, we started getting complaints that a lot of people are choosing to park in the short-term lot for convenience and pay the additional funding. So today we're at $10 in the short-term lot if you park overnight, and there's no cap, compared to the long-term lot, which is $7 with a $35 per week cap. People are willing to pay that additional money, and thus they're using up quite a few of the short-term spots. So we looked at this lot and determined that it was a good place to do a metered hourly lot. So as you can see in the memo, for about about $13,500, we can place a metered parking machine in there. It's solar powered. It accepts cash and credit card, and uses a cell phone to actually phone those in. So there's not any infrastructure needs. It's full, self-sufficient standing machine. This will allow us to have, I think it's 13 stalls that are painted in there.
13,
yeah. We got 13 stalls painted in there, which is a little bit more than what the memo says. They just laid it out this week and painted it. So we've got 2 extra stalls. We think when those are fully, it's going to take us a year or 2 to get them fully adopted by the public. But we think when they get adopted by the public based on the revenue in the long-term lot, we can count on those machines to make us about $11,000 per year in revenue. So payback in about 18 months at full operation. We think it's an inexpensive way to expand our short-term offerings. The last few projects we've been paying anywhere from $1,300 was our cheapest stalls that we created, up to about $2,000 to create new parking stalls. These were just laying there, so the creation of them is more or less free. The machine's what we've got to pay for. And I think this product will actually be fairly popular with a lot of locals that are coming up for a meeting, or just to check in and see when a flight is due to arrive. You can go up to that machine, you put in your stall number, there'll be a little sign in front of your stall, tell you what the number is. You submit your payment and you're done. You don't have to mess with the toll plaza, you don't have to wait in line. It's a quick in and out. And the pay machine actually has 2 pay stations on it, so 2 people can pay at the same time.
Any questions about the parking meter?
So TSA doesn't have an issue with those being that close to the terminal?
As long as they're 300 feet away, they're allowed to park there, and it's about the same distance as our short-term lot.
Who's going to police it?
Our security, we can actually write tickets up here because we are a municipal organization, and so our security will write the tickets under Kent's direction as the Leo, and then they'll be adjudicated by the county downtown.
So it has nothing to do with our existing parking vendor.
Yes, the existing parking vendor will run the credit card information. We don't have a license to run credit cards currently because we just don't do any business on credit cards on the revenue side. So they'll process the credit card transactions and all that type of thing.
Our total cash outlay is $13,500 in addition to the cost of creation of that. Was
Yeah.
any work done there?
Just, it was milled and overlaid like everything else, and then we instead of putting a stripe down the middle, we had them stripe it sideways. So there's a little extra paint. You know.
We'll see if it gets used.
Yeah. And then there's room to expand in the future. There's actually that big median there, so we can actually add more stalls in the future if this product is popular. The other thing I'd note on here is in conjunction with this project, we also plan to increase the fee on the parking in the short-term lot, and we want to go from $10 to $12 for that right now. We don't think there's enough of a price differential there to allow people to park right in the front. We need to keep some of those spaces open, and so we want to increase that fee a little bit to, I don't want to say deter, but encourage the premium nature of the product.
Well, and get them to move to long-term rather than take up the short-term.
So what is the rate going to be down here?
It'll be $1 per half hour, which actually matches the short-term lot.
How do people know what it costs in the short term versus long term? I've parked there, but I don't know that I even
There's a rate
aware of a
sheet.
sign.
Yeah, there's rate sheets on both parking machines there that tell you, I actually think they've taken the rate sheets down.
Yeah, they just put new machines on it. I don't
Just
think they got the
in the last 2 or 3 days.
sign back on yet.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to post new rate machine cards, but yeah, ideally they'll be, and you can check on our website too, the parking rates are also on there.
But by the time you get to the little, to get your ticket, that's when that's where the
You're
rate sheet's
committed.
gonna be?
Yeah, when you pull up the machine, that's where the rate sheet is.
So then if you then you gotta back up.
Well, you get 15 minutes free, so if you're unhappy with your selection, you can proceed immediately to the toll plaza.
And circle around again, okay. So both of those will be under the same motion then.
Yeah.
Any further questions on the recommendation presented by
John,
staff?
you think that a lot of people are paying the premium to park closer, and we'll actually see a loss of revenue if we raise it too much so that people are not willing to pay the premium?
We may see a little loss of revenue, but we do need to keep some of these stalls open for the hourly parking people. It's one of the reasons we like this metered lot is we can put a hard stop at 4 hours and there's no way to load the machine more than that. So if you're leaving overnight or for 2 days, there's no way to put that much revenue in the machine. So we'll have turnover down here, but we want to encourage some turnover down there too, because those stalls really are for the folks dropping people off, and it gets full in the holidays. It's interesting, Thanksgiving, that lot's full, and the long-term lot's a ghost town. At Christmas time, they're both full. But we have been getting some complaints from parkers that are coming to pick people up, and they say, there's too many people parking in there. So we do want to discourage it some. I actually don't think we'll see a revenue decline. I think in total, we'll see a revenue increase, because I think the same people that are on expense account are just going to submit $4 more for that trip and be done with it.
If this is the same rate as the short term, why would I park here?
It's just easier. You don't have to drive out to the toll plaza. You drive up, you pay right there, and you walk into the building on the sidewalk as opposed to crossing roads and everything else. You got a lot of people that orbit the terminal because they don't want to go through that gate arm. It just looks like a scary thing. And so they'll drive around a few times. And after you drive around 2 or 3 times, if the flight's delayed, you kind of get a thirst for information. Maybe you stop at the meter and drop $1 and go in and see what flights are doing.
You can sit there and park, wait for your flight that you're waiting for to pull up, and then plug the meter and come in. See?
You're a bright man.
It's devious thinking there going here.
What do you say with all
Just
that?
sit there and wait until your airplane comes up, and then you can come into the terminal.
You must not have an expense account.
Well, and the other thing too is we'll
It's
have
my
the
own,
additional
yeah.
revenue. We'll have the additional revenue from all the agencies we're kicking out of the the lot over here too. So.
Yeah. All right. There's no further discussion. I'll entertain a motion.
Well, I have one other point.
Okay?
And that is $2 enough for a raise on the short term? I mean,
$12 a day. That's a pretty stiff rate for Great Falls.
That's not good.
I would say.
By comparison, I just saw that the long-term lot rate in San Antonio is $8 a day. So it's fairly high.
Yeah. I mean, if it becomes a real problem and this metered thing doesn't solve it, people still complain. I think at some point we probably have to go to 20 or something that's really discouraging. But if the metered lot, I mean, that may well solve the pressure, because it is going to be fairly convenient to just pull right up to the terminal building, park and pay, and be done with it.
I'd only dovetail on what Brad said, though. If you put the sign further back so you could make a decision before you hit the arm, people may choose differently. Nobody's backing up at the arm.
well, I move that we go with staff recommendation, up the pay lot and pay the $13,500.
I'll second the motion.
Was that motion, what was the first one for the, up the
Up.
10 to 12?
Right, the recommendations go from 10 to 12 on the short-term parking, and then I did it backwards.
13.5, yeah.
Then 13.5, I read bottom to top.
All those in favor of the motion as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. The parking issue has moved along. Okay, 1634 might not be as simple.
Yeah, we, over the last couple of months, we've been engaged in the final design of 1634. The basic project is a mill and overlay, but the engineering around the project has expanded. As they did survey, they identified a line of sight issue, which basically means you can't see a 5-foot object in the middle of the runway from one of the runway ends. FAA allows you to mitigate that by either rebuilding the runway at a new elevation or building a taxiway adjacent to it. So that was probably identified about, what, Rod, 18 months ago or maybe a year ago. So that was added into the project. The other discussion item that's been around for some time is the transverse grade. The runway is built at a shed section today, which essentially just means that all the water goes to one side as opposed to a crown section. The FAA is currently debating whether or not they feel that that's an important design consideration. Our engineer made a good point last week that runways at bigger airports are up to 300 feet wide. Thus, one side sheds identically to our runway as the other side does. So it can't be really an issue of water velocity because that exists at a number of airports today. Hopefully we're going to get, this has been on the table now for 2 years. Hopefully we're going to get a decision made in the next few months on that, or the next few weeks on that, so that the design can be moved forward towards 100% design. We have to be out to bid March 15th. So it's critically important that these decisions are getting made by the FAA. Our telephone call last week shed no new light on the discussions that have been had. We're told that there's been discussions at the headquarters level, but there weren't any lessons learned or critical information needed or any other signs that there was, some smoke coming out of that fire. So we continue to urge FAA to make that decision. The last point, which I think is the most relevant point for our discussions, the FAA, as part of our design of that runway, has told us they would like us to reduce that runway in size from its 150-foot historical width down to 100 feet. And that has a couple critical implications. It has to do with the size of the airplanes that use the runway. The C-130, the Q-400 that Alaska flies, and the 757s, which is the smallest plane that FedEx now flies in here, all require that 150 foot of width, according to their design group. And the FAA's policy does not allow military operations to be counted towards the critical design of that runway. However, the same policy goes on to say that the FAA can approve a project if they feel it's justified. As of yet, we haven't crossed that threshold with the FAA. It's a difficult issue, and as I went down to Memphis a few months ago and we started talking about the master plan and some upcoming projects, they expressed a strong desire to retain 150 foot of width because during any construction or bad weather, they are locked completely out of the airport. We function as a hub, so they need those large airplanes to get in here in order to meet up with the feeder aircraft that bring all the cargo in from the different airports throughout the state. And then the 757s and Airbuses take it back to Memphis. Without the ability to get the 757s and the Airbuses in here for an extended period, in the case of construction or a major accident or extended weather, they can't use the airport. So they pointed that out to the FAA in a letter, which the FAA's policy actually denotes that we should request letters from airport users in support of things like this. But that did nothing but seem to frustrate the issue per our call last week. So the FAA is somewhat high-centered on what to do with this runway, I think. Well, instead of that being, as the policy indicates, something that we should, they should consider, it seemed to just, I'm going to say anger the issue with them in terms of the design of the runway. We tried to tell them, listen, this runway in 2006 accepted all of our commercial traffic during the runway project. It's always had large airplanes on it. There's, in the 70 years of its history, it's had large airplanes for the majority of it.
Who's they?
The FAA.
Who's on the call?
Our engineer and FAA. And we've actually escalated now up to the FAA region.
Okay, so is FAA local then, which means Helena,
Well,
right?
both were on, the region and Helena were both on there. So there's,
Angered everybody?
yeah,
Really?
yeah. I mean, it's, for whatever reason, it's a very contentious issue for them. You know, we thought we were following the protocol that the policy tells us to follow by asking for this, by, you know, the tenant expressing their desire and the fact that the C-130s use it today. If we force the C-130s off of that runway with their nighttime operations where they turn the lights out, with their multiple airplane formations, with their drops, it's going to close the main runway during, you know, critical times. I mean, they're going to, during nighttime operations when they've got the lights off, if you're out 2 miles behind the C-130s, you're not going to be able to see the airfield. So we think it's an important consideration that the FAA needs some time to digest. Hopefully they're going to come back and allow us to keep that width. It will cost the authority some funding. We think up to, as the memo says here, we think up to $500,000 in eligible costs that we'll have to shoulder. It's a real possibility that they may say this is ineligible, that's ineligible because the runway's wider. In truth, the cost is almost no different because in order to make 150 foot into 100 foot, they're going to allow shoulders on the side of it, but we still have to mill up some pavement. We've got to move all the conduit in. We've got to move signage in. The cost really isn't that much different, but they're going to say because we've asked for this additional width, some of these items are going to be ineligible. So we wanted to get this in front of the board, and you know, as we said back in the last time you guys saw this a few months ago, there are going to be some key decision or design elements that pop out of this. This is one of them I think that we need to show support for and act on soon so that the FAA sees that we are willing to pay the additional funding and that we do support 150 foot of width there. I think one of the other critical things to think about too is in a couple of years we're going to pull those arrestor barriers out of 321. That's going to require a full runway closure during those arrestor barriers for maybe a week or two at least, maybe longer. And without 1634 at a you know, at a width and a length that can sustain our commercial traffic, it means we're just simply shut down for commercial traffic. And you know, that cost is tremendous. FedEx pays 40% of our landing fees right now. So you know, we've expressed all of this to the FAA. Hopefully they'll support a sponsor that wants to provide infrastructure for its aviation tenants. That decision is yet to be decided. The exchanges are daily with information going back and forth. I have to say I'm a little bit surprised. Our Part 150 showed continued large aircraft traffic on this runway. Our master plan forecasts, which are not yet approved, show large aircraft traffic on this runway, and we keep having to remind the FAA of this, that it's always been an air carrier runway. Air carriers have always operated on that runway throughout its history, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that, you know, that we want to retain that.
It seems to me that, I mean, the way I look at it is, the FAA wants to narrow our runway, which in the end could cost equal to doing the same amount of work and keeping it 150 feet wide, rather than making it 100 feet wide. Because we have to bring in the conduit, the lights, and
Take up some pavement.
and take up some pavement. So the cost could be kind of a wash one way or the other. Whether the FAA takes that into account or not, it may not make any difference to them, and they may not allow for those costs for us. But the bottom line is, what makes sense for the airport? And I feel that we have to make decisions that make sense for us rather than live with decisions that the FAA makes for themselves. And we have to keep our runway open. We can't afford to lose our runway and lose traffic here at Great Falls. Look what happened to Billings a couple of years ago. When they shut down that runway, they lost that traffic to Bozeman and they never got it back. That might happen to us. You never know. Can we afford that? I don't think we can. At the same time, it's interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they considering a parallel runway down in Bozeman?
That was news to us, and that project seems to be encouraged at a light speed down there by the FAA to get a parallel runway in Bozeman. due to congestion, and we have similar types of issues with how the C-130s operate. In the Montana airports, even though, for us, it seems like we're light years apart in size, in the national spectrum, we're all about the same size.
But bottom line is, the only reason you can justify a parallel runway down in Bozeman is so they don't lose the traffic. I mean, because they can continue to land, traffic there while they're redoing the runway that exists right now. So it doesn't make sense what the FAA is doing. But I think we have to take a position, and I believe we should take a strong position, that we are going to fund the correct decision for the Great Falls Airport. I'd like to think that over time, FAA common sense will prevail, but it may not. And if it doesn't, I think we have to move forward with what makes sense for the Great Falls Airport. And that's what I would recommend we do, but.
I'd like to add just a couple of points in support of that. It's not a significant difference in terms of crosswind landings, but there are going to be days when it's a make or break difference for certain folks. So when the big winds come up, it could shut us down if we don't have that runway for large aircraft. Additionally, although it's not considered likely by the conventional wisdom right now, similarly in the late 1970s, it was not considered likely that the Air Force would get new equipment again. But with the change of administration, things can happen rather rapidly, and what I'm getting at is it's entirely possible that given the premium airspace that we have out there, that we could see a return of tactical aviation to this city in terms of the F-35 or other fighters. If the Air Force gets the F-35s at once, gets new F-22s, there's a good chance that F-16s could come back here as part of the flow and part of a growing of the Air Force back to a size which would be more reasonable, in my opinion. However, what they look for are airfields that have at least 2 runways that are suitable for those aircraft. And if you bring yourself down to a 100-foot wide runway, that's not going to be suitable for a fighter-type aircraft. So I think that in terms of preserving the option of bringing tactical aviation back, it also makes sense to have this runway that's current width and proceed as John is saying. And John, I have a question for you. What is driving the removal of the infrastructure for the cables, for the barriers?
They decided to reuse those brakes elsewhere, so they've pulled them out last year, and I don't know where they went. But then once the cable is inactive, the FAA immediately sees that as an obstruction. If it's operational equipment. But if you go out there today, there's a concrete lip about, 6 inches or so?
Oh, it's about a foot.
About a foot, concrete lip on both sides of the runway. We're not allowed to have anything bigger than a 3-inch break there. So it actually becomes an obstruction. So.
Is there a requirement to remove it?
Yeah, the FAA
Because I hate
will
to see us
require it.
remove it and then reinstall it just a few years later.
I know it. I know it.
Your taxpayer dollars at work.
Yeah.
Evidently.
Well, and that's what's so troubling with this proposal is, we're presenting to the FAA with our payment of the $500,000 to get to 150 feet. It's actually cheaper for the FAA than a 100-foot wide runway is. It's actually cheaper for them to go ahead and leave the 150 feet. And our point is, by being able to keep the 1634 runway at an acceptable length for most of the airplanes here, it limits the construction instructions that we're going to give to a contractor on the primary runway. Like Bozeman or Billings did a couple years ago, they said you can only work weekends. And they still lost 30% of their summer traffic. We would do the same thing. We'd say, contractor, you can only work between 4 a.m. and 11 p.m. at night. That's your window, and you're going to pay for that in the bids. So this runway was last overhauled 20 years ago. The chances are that these improvements that we're going to make next year will last an equal 20 years, if not longer. So it's not as though this is an ongoing cost that the FAA does every year. It's cheaper for them today. It's going to last 20 years, and then you're going to have a minimal additional cost, which will be offset by the construction savings on other projects. So it really isn't a cost proposal that we're talking about. There's not a cost argument for it for the FAA. It just seems to be their new way of business is pavement dieting, and, I think, we're hearing that from many other airports.
So we have a really important tenant that requires.
Well, two.
Yeah, two, but one's private, one's governmental, that must require the ability to land at nearly any time, FedEx on-time delivery. What does an airport closure really mean to that, Ken?
Well,
We don't guarantee them service, but I assume
no,
they must have some perception that we will have service.
Right, and that's just it. Over the long haul, they're going to look at this and say, how reliable is our system in Montana? And how could you do the same thing alternatively? Well, you could split the state in half and send half of it to North Dakota and half of it to Spokane. That's certainly a feasible alternative, because every time that they have to weather out a plane, they're refunding all those $9.95 and $19.95 packages. That's a lot of revenue. Not to mention having their aircraft scattered all over the place, pilots and everything else, they lose a day of operation because now they're not in their station. It is, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for them when they have to divert a 767 or a 757 or an Airbus.
And just after we've spent all this time building up our
Cat 3.
our passenger count here and all our advertising and everything we've done to the terminal and then.
And all the money that's gone into the
question,
Cat 3 approach. That was tens of millions of dollars to get that Cat 3 approach in here.
The second question, you're throwing out $500,000, right? Is that a solid number? Is that an estimate?
Right now, we don't know what all the FAA is going to determine is ineligible. Because what they're going to say is, well, you're responsible then for this basket of costs, because if it was 100 feet, we wouldn't have to do these things. I've pointed out to them, by going to 150 feet, we can actually reduce the amount of grading on taxiway C. And we've shown them a couple ideas where we raise the profile of C over there and save them some grading money. So it might actually be cheaper. But we don't know what all, because they're, I hate to say
more
it,
expensive though.
they're a bit miffed right now, and so they're trying to find every piece of this project that they can say, well, that's your fault. You're
Could it
going
be
to
more
have to pay for it.
expensive? You're
It
saying
could.
to do it their way rather than our way?
So you've used $500,000, but what's a maximum cost?
I think, I don't know. The sky's the limit. Who knows what they're going to pull out? They're in the last call, they were really, bringing out decisions that were made years ago about the profile of the runway for frost protection. They're basically re-engineering and re-guessing all the engineering that's been done the last 2 years.
So it makes good sense to take a strong stand against the FAA, but are you asking to take a strong stand no matter what the expense is? And are you committing money today?
No, I think we're at $500,000. That's where we need to cap it and say, okay, I think it's not going to be more than $500,000. Up until that call, our engineer really thought it would be in the $200,000 range to pay for the additional width. But like I said, now they're pulling out a few more stops to see, what other costs there are. At the same time, I think at some point we may have to attack this politically. And I hate to say that, they're our regulator, but, we need to demand reasonable outcomes from our regulators. And Senator Daines actually has FAA on his oversight committee. And then, of course, Senator Tester was very involved in the C-130. I've made his office aware of this because, it does endanger the C-130 mission if we're not able to accomplish all the training that airplane needs to accomplish in our town. So at some point, in addition to this, we may have to, put this out in the light and let everybody see how it's unfolding, and is it reasonable, and is it, what we need to be doing.
So you've got, go ahead, Sean.
Is it just a personal clash you have with some guy?
No,
did you literally upset the wrong man?
No.
Or female?
Well, I started preparing this week an inventory of our last 3 or 4 years of projects. And it's just, in my opinion, it's the new mindset of the FAA. During the SRE project, I know some of you weren't here, we literally had bid the project, started constructing the project, and they rewrote their regulations to say the bathrooms were ineligible. We pointed out to them that no jurisdiction is going to allow you to build a 10,000 square foot building where you acknowledge you're going to be maintaining vehicles and having people work there without building restrooms. So, every building from henceforth, you're telling the local sponsor that they're going to pay a significant amount of the cost to do these buildings. Last year, we had the entry-exit road project where after 5 or 6 grants, the FAA determined that our entry road is ineligible. And the architecture hasn't, or the geometry hasn't changed since 1967 on that, but they decided that now it's ineligible based on their interpretation of the rules. And that went all the way up to headquarters. So, I think it's really just the new way of doing business. We've heard similar things from other airports that they're seeing, changes in the FAA's interpretation of the rules and what's eligible and what's not eligible.
So what was their response when they got the letter from FedEx? Were they not receptive to their feedback?
It seemed to really upset people. I mean, to be quite honest, it just seemed to upset them. That they felt that this was a decision that, was right, and they had made it, and it was the way it should be, and now all that's being questioned. And we pointed out to them that the 727s, I mean, we did address this during the optimization study, but at that point we had 727s in the FedEx fleet. They retired the 727s last year. We could have asked for a 727 for a couple of weeks or whatever during a runway closure to deal with that. Well, when we went to Memphis and sat down with them, they said, well, we're not going to bring anything back in that spot. There's not going to be a smaller hub connector. We're not buying Airbuses. We're not doing any of that. The 757 is the bottom of our fleet, and by going to 100 feet, we can't land there anymore. It's not allowed. And so that was new information really, and so then they started down the path of why is this happening? What are the reasons? You were always 150 feet. Yes, we were. We told them this is the FAA's decision, and you have to take it up to the FAA. We don't have control over it. So they did. And we thought that would be accepted and considered, because it's simply a change in the planning assumption, that was not welcome input.
Their displeasure at our insistence on maintaining this width would not be inconsistent with promises they may have made to Bozeman about a parallel runway. Meaning, perhaps they had already mentally allocated those funds to that project.
Well, in their mind, but it might not cost them any more money. That's the thing that they're not willing to even explore.
Well, but it would cost them more if we didn't have a project this year. And that was one thing that came out of that call that really did concern me was near the end of the call, all of a sudden there were a lot of questions about, well, this seems to all be up in the air, and there seems to be a lot of questions that need to be answered, and you really think you're going to be ready for March 15th. And, at that point, you really get concerned about what the motivations are. Are we running out the clock here? Is that why it's taken 2 years to get a decision on transverse grade?
So, what are the ramifications if we just decide not to take their recommendation?
Well, they're funding it, so that's the problem is,
Well, they'll fund whatever they're gonna fund. By accepting the dollars, are we required to utilize their design?
Yep.
So what's the total cost of the project?
$10
Worst
million.
case scenario, we tell them to go pound sand.
If you include the change to 1735, it's about a $10 million program.
Huh, significant.
Yeah.
John, if you assess that they're not interested in being reasonable at this point, then I would recommend that we contact our legislators now.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we are. We, the way, we've given them a little bit more time to see what the next round of response is from them. Are they trying to rebuild the partnership here, or are we going back to our corners and getting ready to come out swinging? And I think that's kind of where we are is, like I said, I've already briefed one of the local offices and told them, I'm developing a memo to document some of this. We began to write the history on the project and, in fact, the project of the last 3 years to kind of document what's happened. But frankly, quite frankly, with this kind of approach to things, small authorities like us are going to be very challenged to maintain their facilities in the future. Like I said, the cumulative impact, if this is 500,000, the roadway project's probably another 500,000 in entry roads that aren't eligible, and then on top of that, the cost of the SRE bathrooms, which is probably 100,000 or something when you include all the hot water heater and everything else that was made ineligible. That's a lot of money in 3 years.
The governor is counting on being able to use the C-130s for disasters.
Exactly.
And if you start working that kind of traffic with the C-130s, you're going to need a second runway that's suitable for that. Otherwise, you're going to have to choose between C-130 traffic and commercial traffic.
And we've made that point too. In fact, I'll pass around the email I got yesterday with the recitation from the FAA notes. It says that military aircraft are not to be considered. I pointed out to them that the C-130s as an International Guard mission are not strictly military aircraft. They're available to the governor. And so there's a civil aviation component to it also. And the other thing I've pointed out to him that our brand shiny new Part 150 study that was just done shows 30% of that traffic on the crosswind runway. And if that noise contour is relayed back on the on the main primary runway, we're probably going to have to start over with a new Part 150. And I wonder if that noise is going to leak back into those neighborhoods that we're now outside of. Because it is a substantial amount of traffic. We're doing 2,000 operations a year. It's a lot of traffic.
I'd recommend that in addition to the legislators, that the Adjutant General be reached through Colonel Ronick and have the Adjutant General pitch into this directly to the governor as well.
I think that's a great idea. And in fact, I've got a meeting with the base. I think it's this week. It might be early next week. But I was planning to tell them that I need to reach out to Helena just so Colonel Smith's aware that we're doing that. But I also hope to get a letter from them because in that policy you'll see that it actually encourages sponsors to ask for letters from tenants on the impacts they incur from these decisions.
The state is a tenant.
Apparently they aren't serious about encouraging comments.
Not listening. So you made a good point, right? I agree with 150-foot width, and you're fighting the good fight. You're taking it to all the avenues that seem reasonable to try and get the decision you want. But what do you recommend? I mean, I read the recommendation. I still don't understand what it means.
I think what we need is...
Are you saying we're going to spend $500,000?
Yeah, I think we need to have a resolution.
$10 million, because that was $10 million
Right,
throughout there.
and we may have to come back and amend this, but I think we need a resolution that says, the airport authority supports 150 foot of width on 1634, and we're willing to authorize funding up to $500,000 of local costs in order to ensure that 150 foot is reached. And I think what that'll give is the FAA will have, then the indication from the sponsor, because we're still the grant sponsor, that, we're not only supporting 150 feet, but we're willing to fund the additional costs.
But they could yank their funding.
They can, yeah, and, we could end up, with, the full meltdown, and then, like I said,
So then we cancel the project,
Yeah,
or
we
what's the
cancel.
repercussions of that?
Well, if they yank the project, we'd continue to operate how we are. The one problem they've got with that is runway 7 intersects runway 321, and that's considered a federal hotspot. It's their highest priority of all the projects out there in the category of projects out there is to remove those intersections. That provides the only access today to 321 or to 1634. So we can't eliminate the intersection without doing this project. The project in itself, sets at that highest priority level because of that intersection. So they're moved to do something to remedy that because it is a hot spot. That's why this thing, it's surprising it's melted down at this point over literally 10 feet of pavement because they're willing to fund 100 feet with 20-foot shoulders on either side. One of the things we heard on the phone call from the engineer as well, that additional to 150 feet, the drainage, that's a big deal. Well, it couldn't possibly be a big deal because you're already at 140 feet. It's the same water velocity. And it exists right now at 150 feet and has existed that way for 70 years.
John, who should contact the legislators? Should it be the airport authority?
Yeah, we have a relationship with all the legislators, through the Montana Defense Alliance more frequently than anything, really. But Senator Daines, now that he's taken on the FAA and TSA, he's been very active in engaging the airports. So we know there are staffers that staff these projects, and the next step for us would be to send them a memo to say, we're having these issues, we may need your help.
But would it be your signature block or?
Yeah. No, we can do it under my signature block. Like I said, we have a good relationship with these folks. We talk to them fairly regularly.
You want to take it?
There's 3 outcomes. So we pass this, we spend somewhere around $500,000, the project goes forward. The FAA yanks the project. Or there's some in between?
Yeah, the in-between, that they're kind of probing the argument that the only reason we need a crosswind is for small airplanes. The problem, and if you look at the wind coverage, by their wind coverage design standards, that may be true. You have to have 95% coverage, which we have for large airplanes. But the smaller airplanes that can't handle a 10 mile per hour crosswind, they need a secondary runway at this airport under federal standards. That's what enables us to have a crosswind runway. However, the other eligibility criteria that factors in is substantial use. If you have an existing facility that's being used by large airplanes, in and itself has its own eligibility because it's being used. This runway has always had large aircraft use, and the C-130 training mission on it is up to 2,000 operations a year. Their standard is 500. We have nearly 500 operations just from the commercial carriers and FedEx on that runway. So no matter how you slice it, it's right at the cross-section of eligibility, either way.
Isn't there a fourth option that logic all of a sudden becomes dawned upon the FAA and they fund the whole thing? Or 90% of it or whatever are, I mean, there's a chance we may not spend the whole $500,000 if level heads prevail.
Yeah, and that's possible. That's what our engineers are arguing towards. We have one breakthrough this week that the FAA agrees that the Alaska airplane meets the design standard that would require 150 feet, and that plane does use that runway during crosswind storms. So piece by piece, they're trying to compile the argument. And the thing is, the regulations, as you see there, it allows judgment to enter into it, but for some reason, that piece of the regulation is completely being ignored.
Anybody ready? Anybody ready to make a motion?
One point of clarification. How does the 500,000 apply? Where would that come into play?
The FAA will certainly say that the additional 10 feet is ineligible. So they were willing to go with 100 feet, 20-foot paved shoulders on either side, because we have 150 feet right now. If you go out there, it's 150 feet. What they're saying is we want to move everything in and make 100 feet with 20-foot paved shoulders. What we're saying is, let's just leave it alone.
No, hold it, it's 150 feet
Right now,
with no shoulders?
with no shoulders.
So the 500,000 would be for the 10 additional feet of width.
Yeah. Well,
Ineligible expense.
that's one thing for certain we're going to have to pay for. Then the question beyond that is, what are the other things they're going to claim are ineligible based on that width? And the use. They might come back and say, you're adding an extra inch of asphalt because of the heavy military use, and that's your cost. There again, we may have to fight on that. But that's a possibility that they could come back and say. And what's troubling about this whole argument that we're having, if cost is the justification, great. We can save $1.5 million by not crowning the section of this runway. That alone outweighs any of the other costs we're talking about in here. And as of yet, we've heard no compelling argument about why we have to convert this to a crown at some point in the future.
Seems to have worked pretty well so far.
70 years.
So the $10 million would drop to 8.5, because if we elected not to participate, we're not going to crown it.
We wouldn't crown it, yeah.
Would we take on an $8.5 million project?
That's a big project. We'd have to sell bonds.
I'm just thinking worst case scenario, right?
No, right.
And then the 8.5 probably could be pared down to 6 or 7 if you, again, got rid of some of these arbitrary things we
Yeah, but
do
it's still,
just to
it's
get
still
the.
FAA won't let you build it.
Well,
With our money, will they?
if they would, if we build it, but then it'll never be eligible for any federal aid in the future, is what they're going to say.
That's an administration change.
And it really needs to be settled before March or before that point.
Yeah,
In order for this to go forward.
Right. Right now, they're carrying 2 designs for the crown and the transverse grade. They're carrying 2 designs for width, although the designs are very similar because either way, it's almost the same width. It's just an extra electrical package. But yeah, hopefully we'll have decisions in the next couple of weeks.
They're trying to get us to break strictly on engineering fees.
And the $500,000 today, let's say we spend it, it comes from what source?
That would be out of our reserves. Yeah, we'd have to fund it out of reserves. The one thing I would note on that, remember, these are lump sum engineering contracts. And I know we often talk about how expensive our engineers are. This is why. Because they're not getting paid a one skinny dime more to go out there and have these battles with the FAA daily. And unfortunately, I mean, they've got a huge crew engaged in it. I mean, they've got different discipline engineers and everything they've had to call upon to help defend this.
Please.
So one last question before we go further. So we agree to this $500,000, right? And it comes back that the ineligible is $1.5 million. When do we find that out? Prior to March?
Yeah, it should be fairly soon.
Then we just vote on it again and we
Yeah.
decide to go forward or
Right.
not?
Or not.
It doesn't happen after March?
No, because we'll have design, they're gonna have to make these decisions in, this year. The engineers will produce engineers' estimates based on whatever the final project is, which we'll have in the springtime when we do the funding for everything. This is just to demonstrate to the FAA that we are supportive of 150 feet and we're willing to fund the ineligible portion, because that's been a big source of the discussion, with the FAA thus far.
So I'll make a motion to approve the runway 1634 width and funding as it's written.
What do I
I'll
got?
second.
That's been moved and seconded. Any further questions
No
or
problem.
comments? All those in favor of the motion as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We support you.
I also move that we send some oxygen to the FAA.
Well,
Maybe that will
the
help.
only thing I don't like about it, though I voted for it, was I think it says more of a statement if we didn't put a cap on it. We're gonna do it, screw you. Excuse my language.
I think we can make that decision later.
Yeah.
But I think there's, might be
You
people
have
in
one
this room.
public comment.
Dwight has a
Dwight has a comment.
Just kind of a sidebar comment, is for the first time, I believe for the first time, FedEx has scheduled their DC-10s in for this Christmas season.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so we're training up on that, 4 weeks of flights.
Gosh, I haven't seen a DC-10.
Or their MD-10s.
Yeah, right.
But, I mean, I don't know if that's smaller than the Airbus, but it's certainly a wide body airplane.
Can we get them to land on 1634 a lot?
Yeah. Land one time and prove to the FAA that can't be done. Okay. Airport Authority Board comments. Commissioner Buck, any comments at this time?
No, sir.
Commissioner Rooney?
Only that I do fully support the 150-foot width. Just want to make sure that we keep money in mind as we go forward, but definitely I can see the importance to the airport. So well done, keep it up.
Yep.
Good luck with the fight.
Commissioner Goodson? And I have no comments at this time. Any comments from the public at this time? Okay, then we'll adjourn for 5 minutes here, and we'll come back at 20 after and get on to the rest of the work session agenda. Thank you.
That is.
Yeah, where's that?
White elephant.
Sure. I don't understand the barrel.
Mike has it.
Here's where we pissed them off. We said that FAA states their policy is not to include military aircraft. Can you give